it's a love-hate relationship that has developed over the past 3 years, from a total denial as to the value of fintechs in the financial system. And then a lot of question marks about, are fintechs coming to take over the role of banks, until eventually we reached a level where there is a chance for partnerships, but it has to be really done properly. While the banks have the customer base, fintechs have the technology and the agility. And of course, the latest pandemic with COVID-19 might be the wake-up call for everybody to join forces. So today on Fintech Flares, which is brought to you by Fintech Galaxy, we have with us three amazing guests. Ahmad Abu Eideh, CEO of United Arab Bank. Hello, Ahmad.
Hi Mirna. Hi, everyone.
We also have Khalil Alami, CEO of Teller.
Hi, everyone. Welcome.
And from Saudi Arabia, we have Omar Shabaan, CEO of The Space, which is an incubator, accelerator, co-working space. Hi, Omar.
Hello. Good afternoon. Good morning.
Okay, so of course, I've got to start with Ahmad. Ahmad, you have more than 3 decades of banking experience, and the current crisis, they say it's the mother of all crises. It requires a lot of leadership, resilience, agility, and the stuff they usually talk about on LinkedIn to actually get out of this crisis. It's like nothing we've seen before. How do banks deal with such crises? And what does it take for a banker to lead the organization out of this?
Well, thanks, Mirna. Thanks, everyone. Of course, Mirna, this is a general question. And in one of the posts you were alluding to, one of my posts, basically, I did talk about the differences. A crisis is not a duplicate of another crisis. Each crisis has its own characteristics, and it's totally different to the earlier experience or crisis. This one, we barely started, and I don't think we would know the full repercussions of the current crisis till a few more months from now. What we need to do today as banks is maintain, and this is of paramount importance, maintain our liquidity levels comfortable, and of course adhere to the various ratios, especially liquidity ratios today. Of course, there will be a spike in non-performing loans, and this is something that we do need to monitor very carefully on a day-to-day basis. So all of us, I mean, not just the banking sector, but all sectors came into this crisis unprepared exactly for the C-19 crisis and how long it will take to actually feel and understand what we're getting ourselves into. Of course, we've been through many crises before. I personally have been through a large number of crises over 3 decades. Very quickly, first Gulf War, Asian crisis in '98, first Gulf War in '91, Asian crisis '98, the Google bubble 2000, 9/11 in 2001, of course, and in 2008, the global financial crisis, and each is totally different to the other. This one is totally different, and people talk about this as a pandemic. They don't talk about it as a financial crisis. I personally, and in my personal opinion, I tend to disagree, where I think this is a financial crisis. And it was the bubble. So if you look at the global markets, the asset prices got really inflated globally. And I think the markets were looking for an excuse to correct. and correct very aggressively as we can see today. So in a nutshell, Mirna, liquidity is key. Managing non-performing loans, and these two come hand in hand in the time of crisis. I can go on and on, but I know we have limited time.
No, I'd like you to dig deeper into the banks in particular. So you laid for us, on the economic level, on the crisis level. But let's talk about banks. It's important for fintechs to really understand what happens behind closed doors. We think that, fintech is going to come to change the world and all that. Maybe it will, but is it the right time now to talk to banks? What is keeping bankers and CEOs busy at this moment?
Well, with all due respect to all fintechs, now, I would disagree with the word you used, Mirna, just a short while ago, which is denial. There was, in my opinion, there was no denial as far as the future is concerned, and as far as the need for fintechs. And personally, I think in the future, banks will be fintechs. That's the future, basically. And there's no denying that fact. Anyone denying that fact is delusional. Now, as of this moment, and of course, I know I'm talking to a lot of fintechs today, and I would zoom in to startups, and that's an area of personal belief and personal support from my side. I do support a lot of startups, not just fintechs, but startups in the region, and I do mentor a good number of people in 3 continents, basically, and invest personal time. Now, today, I do see a barrage of approaches from fintechs telling me that now is the time. You see, people are isolated, they're at home, they need to use fintechs. Guys, now is not the time to talk about this. It's not the time. We do have priorities today, and as I mentioned, priorities in terms of liquidity and in terms of managing non-performing loans. Now, for banks that were ready, and by the way, I do talk today, I'm not representing my organization, I'm just giving an expert view of a banker that has been in the field for about 30 years. Today, banks that were not prepared in terms of digitization and in terms of IT capabilities, including the various platforms, they weren't ready, so they will not be ready today to talk about onboarding new solutions. That's for sure. Banks that were ready already in the past, ready, they probably won't be talking about new solutions. They'd be probably talking about enhancing the existing capabilities and platforms, because it's all about priorities today. And at the end of the day, our priority is serving our customer and maintaining our regulatory requirements. So wrong time today to start talking about new solutions, new platforms, new ideas, just simply because today the priority is elsewhere. That's the priority today.
Hala, you don't agree with some of the things that I said. I actually think that you are kind of contradicting yourself in some of the things that you said. So for example, you're saying that some banks were not denying that fintech and digitization is the future, but this crisis has uncovered a lot of PR stunts that were done by banks, just telling the world that they are going digital, when in reality, most of their teams are still on desktops, no core banking systems, no cybersecurity in place. I mean, what bank would believe in digitization and their own bank is not ready for a crisis like this, where the only thing you need to do, at least from a HR perspective, is make sure that your teams are at home, working, connected in the virtual space, and we're in the 21st century now.
Tamam. Mirna, good you mentioned that, and you may think you've hit the jackpot here. And I can tell you one thing. What the main issue I have, and I mean this in all good faith with fintechs. You think you know it all, guys, you don't. And this is coming from someone who supports fintechs, supports startups. Now, we come from two totally different worlds. Understand this, please. As a banker, we are molded. We're molded in a certain way and operate in a certain way. And we come from a very highly regulated industry. Fintechs, on the other side, are barely regulated, and are much more free spirits than bankers are. So, and I mean that in a very good way. You're a free spirit, you have the choice to think freely, act freely. That's choice you have. Bankers do not have. And by virtue of the way we are molded, and by virtue of the very high regulation that we need to deal with on a day-to-day basis, in my opinion, this is the core difference. Now, fintechs would be, and I've spoken to fintechs, so I know how they think. These idiots in the banks, they're not getting it. I mean, I come with a lovely solution that, you know, can revolutionize everything for them now, but they're not listening to me. Well, hey, your approach is wrong. Usually, in many cases, fintechs would go straight to the CEO and try to pitch an idea. It doesn't work that way, guys. It doesn't work that way. We need to go to the people that are relevant to fintechs.
Anna, later on in the conversation, I'm going to ask you بالضبط يعني what is the best way to crack that nut. لأنه يعني I wanna شايفة Khalil is laughing a lot, and I wanna give him the chance to respond. So, but
back to your point. Back to your point, Mirna. Back to your point.
Yeah.
Now, I can, and as I said, I'm not talking about my own organization. I'm talking about the industry, basically. Industry has gone through a lot of transformation. It has, and there's no contradiction, Mirna, whatsoever. This is a journey. It's a journey, and journeys do take time. Now, I'm one of the most staunch supporters of the word transformation, and I'm so much against this, what do you call it, the new buzzword?
Disruption.
Sorry? Disruption. No, it's transformation. The business is being transformed totally towards digital. Now, banks, generally speaking, they're not the same. Every bank has its own sort of digitization agenda. Some are way beyond, some are behind. Now, I can't put all banks in the same basket, and it really depends on the leadership, management board, and their priorities. But all banks, I can guarantee you, are somewhere on that journey. They're somewhere on that journey. Now, when I spoke about not being prepared, and you tell me who was prepared for a pandemic in 2020. That is my point, basically.
Yeah.
You know, you can be prepared for so many things. A pandemic of this sort of size was last heard of 1918 or straight after World War II. But you know, we are prepared for so many other things. Now, today we go back to basics, and today we go back to, as I said, monitoring these two very important items: liquidity, non-performing loans. Every bank is somewhere on that journey. So this is something that fintechs need to be critically aware. And again, our response time, and I know you're going to ask that later on, our response time, generally speaking, may not be up to the liking of fintechs today. But sorry, tough. There are policies and procedures that we need to follow. And coming, again, from a high regulated industry to a zero or very slight regulated industry, there is a big gap of seeing eye to eye.
Okay, let me go to Khalil. Khalil, you heard Ahmad talk a lot about how banks think, and it's important to understand how fintechs think. لأنه طبعا he's right in so many ways, especially when it comes to the readiness of fintechs to deal with banks, to understand the market dynamics, to understand regulations. Not all fintechs are leaders in the space. Not all founders understand what they're doing for real. From your experience, Khalil, dealing with the crisis, and of course, nobody was expecting such a crisis, but still, we should be ready to work from anywhere. We should be ready to operate in cases. I mean, yes, we're not ready for a crisis, but we're in a war-torn region, right? I mean, probably the UAE is a safe haven, or the Gulf in general, but we're living in an area where any moment a war could erupt and people will have to work from underground, not only from their homes.
Yes, agreed. Thank you, Mirna. Well, I agree with a lot of things that Ahmed mentioned, and he has a point on a lot of things. And thank you for your insight. It was great insight from coming in from a bank's perspective and as a CEO. Now, the issue or the difference between my personal perception of this pandemic and how I translate it into my company, and the difference between how you look at it as a bank and what you translate it into your organization is I think it's, as you mentioned, that this pandemic is actually a financial crisis rather than a pandemic. I disagree completely to the core. So I believe that this pandemic is actually has multiple aspects of it. There is the part where it is capitalistic financial crisis, but there is a humanitarian level, there is an economical level, there is a worldwide globalization aspect to that as well. So today it's not really about, for me at least, if we go back to the most significant difference between the fintech and the traditional bank, it's basically the purpose. So the fintech products, they are all created by identifying gaps in the marketplace, where legacy banks, who cater for wider audiences, cannot identify or close this gap. Like you mentioned, you're on the defensive as a bank. You are looking at liquidity. You are looking at non-performing loans, and you lost the agility. The agility is there. Today we have a moral obligation to cater during this pandemic, to not just cater cater for making a profit or riding the wave of e-commerce. Today our fintech solutions are being offered for free during this period of time. Most online payment gateways have offered free services in order to be able to capture, and move this traditional in-store behavior of spending into an e-commerce platform, making those offline go to online for free in order for the economical cycle in any economy to grow and continue. Today, if there is a butcher in Dira that is completely offline, no website, no mobile app, why can't he sell his meat before it goes rotten and deliver it in an e-commerce perspective? He can't, because the bank is not going to support him. When I come and onboard him, we saw many banks, and I'm not talking about any specific bank here, but I'm looking at the whole region. We operate in the GCC in multiple countries and in the Levant. We work with banks very closely. We're very intertwined as an online payment gateway. And we saw business continuity plans for big banks that failed. The banks could not work from home. They could not onboard. They could not do any kind of function to support their customers. And they had to actually disrupt their service for a few days until they figured it out. It is a catastrophe for me, from coming from a fintech where it is all about user experience. User experience really is the key that is overhanging over all of us, where today's consumer wants things now, immediately, and 24/7 available. So today, if my user experience gets interrupted, this is a huge problem for me. It's not only for my bottom line, but it's for a brand and the reputation and an operation of an economy. So today we saw banks that were disrupted completely. I could not do a single perform anything through the mobile app. We saw all this talk about digitization really flushed down the drain. So unfortunately, from our perspective as a fintech, we look at these regulated institutions, the banks. They hold the regulation flag. Oh, it's so complex. It's so, yes, it is complex, but it's something that's been there for a long time. It evolves, it changes. There's always time for new innovation. We don't have to wait for something to happen to innovate, to become digital. The problem is in my opinion, that is hindering this innovation is that the banks are basically concerned about their liabilities of deposits, performing loans, and they get the sovereign insurance because of their liabilities and the deposits that they have. So today the fintechs came in to close this gap, use big data, use AI, become agile, very agile, and personalize the experience. Because today the world, you interact through your smartphone. Is there a bank that is ready to operate through a smartphone 100%? We have not seen anything yet.
Khalil, let me highlight something very important. Yes, you offer a lot of added value compared to a bank when it comes to onboarding customers and e-commerce and all that. But at the same time, you can't operate without a bank. You need
100%.
يعني half of your time as a CEO, you spend it shopping around, getting banks to become issuers, to support you with their database, مش عارفة.
Yes, 100%. Mirna, if you allow me, I'm not here to say that fintech will replace banks. Fintech and banks have to complement each other. And the reason why I say this is if you look at the fintech world right now, there are many successful fintech operations that are only working around and in the perimeter of a bank. And these eventually, if you look at it from Goldman Sachs to the big banks to the smaller banks, most of them are either invested in them or they end up buying them. So the banks are ending up even acquiring fintech startups to enhance their services. This is really where the end game. So like Mr. Ahmed said, I agree with him. The fintech's future, the banks are going to become the fintech. Yes, they will become the fintech. Because if you want to stay regulated, work within the regulation, and offer the cutting edge technology and user experience and everything, you will need to be a bank, unfortunately. And you might, the fintech will become the bank, but he might use the different fintechs that he acquired around his perimeter.
Okay, I'm gonna come back to you, Ahmed, in a minute, but let me run this poll, but then I have to bring Omar to the conversation. So do banks truly believe in partnerships and collaboration with fintechs, or it's mostly PR stunts? Please, all of you, I'm going to launch the poll now. It's a simple yes, no, or they do but don't know how. Can you see the, okay. So do banks truly believe in partnerships and collaboration with fintechs, or it's mostly PR stunts? Omar, Shabaan, what do you think the result is? Yes, no, or they do but don't know how?
I think it's going to be they do but don't know how, I think.
Let's see. Okay, I'm ending the poll.
That's what I answered, so.
Let's see. Right, so I am gonna end the poll now. Yep, so 50% said they do, but they don't know how. But remember, 32 said no, okay? So
I think the scary number here is the 18%.
18, well, you can bundle 18 with number 3, no. It is true, they do, but they don't know how.
Let me tell you, And let me tell you, I think
Omar, tell us a little bit about what you do, about the space,
sure.
and
yeah. Look, a couple of points. First of all, I think the poll is a bit general in the sense that, you know, you cannot say that all banks agree or disagree. I think there are various. I mean, if you talk about maybe advanced markets, if you talk about Singapore, it might be like 90% yes, they believe. And if you talk about less mature markets. So if you're talking about the Middle East or the Arab world, I think also there are some countries which have more progressive banking systems, which have been more believing in fintech. So let me talk more about what I know, which is the Saudi market. But then, first, let me comment. I want to be very neutral. I'm not a banker. I'm not a fintech. I'm like Mirna. So I want to moderate with her today. And I was really enjoying Ahmad's comments as a veteran banker and Khalil as a fintech. Look, I don't think it's a love-hate relationship per se. It's more of the, you know, I think banks and fintech still didn't get into the opportunity to know each other well, right? Before,
they're dating,
yeah, exactly. So the in my opinion, it's getting there. It's getting there. Definitely, the past couple of years, we've seen a lot of progress when it comes to fintechs and banks approaching. Look, in Saudi, for example, I'll give you a very classical case of what we have. In Saudi Arabia, we're a co-working space, we're an incubator, so we act as a medium between startups and banks in relation to fintechs, obviously. And we have banks coming, talking to us, saying exactly the third element, which is we don't know how to reach fintech, we don't know how to collaborate with fintech. We want you to identify, let's do a hackathon, let's do an accelerator, let's do a bootcamp, etc. That's a very classical case. What happens is that the department that is responsible to deliver that is often who? Marketing and PR. This is an example that happened across two or sometimes it's CSR. CSR departments within banks go and do hackathons and accelerators. I don't think this is right. I don't think that the CSR department or marketing department should be the ones who carry on. I think it should be the IT department, it should be the digital transformation. Another point, I noticed a mix between digital transformation and working with fintech in the conversation. I don't agree that banks, especially in this part of the world, haven't digitally transformed. I think they are. My wife is a banker, she's a legal in a bank. I see her working all the time from home. I think they have a lot of systems that are enabling them to work. So from a digital transformation, I do think that banks have, you know, leaped a lot. Using fintech is a very different conversation. I tend to agree with Ahmad on that the timing is not right because of what he mentioned, that the two focus areas on. At the same time, I would ask a question. Why till now, with all this pandemic, everything going on, why haven't we seen digital banks stepping up and coming up, you know, strongly in the region? It's a question I don't know. I'm not in the sector. I was just hearing a lot on, you know, digital banks coming in, digital banks, and apparently we're still far behind. It's a question. It's a food for thought rather than, you know, a statement.
Actually, we don't have fully operational digital banks in the region. We don't have the challenger banks yet. We have digital windows of traditional banks, and
a digital bank, GIB's meme, صح ولا?
You should ask Yahya.
I don't know. I'm not a banker. Again, don't.
He will tell you if it's true. ولا حتى يعني. I'm not saying they are not, you know, they're not useful for the market and ما في عندهم client base. لا, of course they are. But I'm just saying, you know, in the true description of a challenger bank, we still don't have. Saudi will have a couple of them coming soon, but طبعا they need time to really operate. Ahmed, we're going to go back to you now. And Omar mentioned something very, very important, which is where the budget is coming from. لأنه, and this is one of the things that we as you know, Fintech Galaxy, we try very hard to understand from the banks so that we give it to the fintechs. لأنه understanding procurement cycle, understanding budgets is very important. وخاصة إنه, yes, it is true that collaboration with banks, or at least digital activities, they usually start from the CSR departments, then they go to the marketing until they reach the digital department, which unfortunately hits a lot of bottlenecks with the IT, because the IT team are threatened with whatever the fintech is bringing to the table. So from your experience, and I know you've contributed a lot with the setup of one digital bank a few years back for one of the large banks. From your experience, what's your advice to fintechs, as in how do banks set up their budgets? And when today we had a call with a bank and he said, we slashed our budgets, like we're really down to the bare minimum and there's not $1 we can spend on anything else. Is this happening? Is it normal? I think it's normal within, the current situation. So what's your take on this?
Well, first, I can't agree more with Omar on this should not in any way, shape or form have anything to do with CSR. Nothing to do with CSR. Innovation and developing the channels, nothing to do with CSR. I agree with you, Omar, completely. Now, we need to understand the cycle. So again, we do have budgets, and there are times when we can start pitching to the banks, in my opinion. And again, I put 3 lines under that. We can start from pitching to a bank from the beginning of the year, beginning of a year, to around August, September. That would be the best time to pitch for any sort of platform. Banks start usually their budgeting exercise towards end of Q3, early Q4, and they're locked and loaded before year end. So as far as timing is concerned, it's very critical that, and this is a general comment. Every bank has its own way of doing things. I understand that, but I'm just giving a general comment. The question would be from the fintech to the bank. It's very important that you try to avoid pitching for anything during the budgeting exercise. It needs to be done before. But that is an extremely important element, and that's when your digital, creative, IT department start putting in their requirements for the following year and what they need to enhance. Now, you alluded to. Yeah.
Sorry, one question. For a bank that has a fiscal year, January to December 31st, okay? When is the best time to make sure that you're in next year's budget?
I mentioned that, Mirna. You can pitch anytime.
So do you find budgets by September? Well,
usually yes. Usually we close the requirements for the following year around end of Q3. So within Q3, if fiscal year is Jan to December, usually Q3 is most critical in terms of budgets. Usually budgets get approved towards mid to end of Q4. Once a budget is approved, that's it. It's too late, usually too late. And usually for IT/platform/fintech, it will have to go through the next cycle, which is the following year. And that idea really frustrates a lot of fintechs. Fintechs view banks sometimes as organizations with very deep pockets, and my cost is 10,000, 100,000, 200,000. You're the big buy with deep pockets. Yes, maybe, but again, we have so many other elements that we need to budget for, other than fintechs or even creative altogether, or even digital altogether. We need to budget for so many other items. This is one item amongst many. So the advice is try to pitch and get the buy-in from the bank as soon as you can, and ensure and follow up with the bank, with the relevant department, whether this actually has gone for budget approval or not. So, and I agree with you, Mirna, where some people in IT departments or what have you would view or would feel threatened by the fintech at the end of the day, that if it's fully digitized, if we apply everything, you know, we won't have a job at the end of the day. And yes, that is a real threat. I agree with that. But again, there is a lot of supervision as far as the relevant department is concerned. And there is a request by, or requirement by the leadership of that organization and the board to digitize. So whether they like it or not, in the IT department, there is oversight. And we do need to see a good number of creative ideas. So if I may just interject for a couple of minutes on, and thank you, Khalil, for the very valuable feedback that you did give. And again, in my opinion, Khalil, we go into generalizing. Now, banks are banks like any other company. Every company has its own culture, and banks you cannot generalize, in my opinion. So I'm talking to you today with 40% of my workforce on leave, on annual leave. 36% of my staff are working remotely. And the balance, one of them sitting in the head office today, but in the offices and branches. And the number of complaints we've had about breakages in our service is minimal, in spite of having 40%, as I said, on leave today. Now, payments, Khalil, is one element and one element only. But you haven't touched upon trade, for example, establishing LCs, issuing letters of guarantee. You haven't spoken about one very important element today, in today's COVID-19 world, which is people who cannot pay their monthly installments on their loans. So I need to cater to payments as one element and one element only. But my top priority today, in today's world, is actually supporting those who can't pay their installments. It's not payments. Number one, of course, payments is so very important, and payments needs to be done seamlessly. But today is the day when people coming and begging and crying and saying, I'm sorry, I can't pay my installment this month. How can you help me, bank? That is the top priority. Yeah. So in the bigger scheme of things, we do need to prioritize. So just sorry, I just had to mention that. And you will see some breakages in the payment chain. You will. And maybe the banks you deal with, maybe not, but generally speaking, you will see some. People are actually working from home. I've got people logging off their laptops, and we do monitor that at 11 p.m. So we've got people who are dedicated, working very hard to support in difficult times. This is something we need to be critically aware of. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. If I may respond.
Khalil, okay, but briefly, لأنه
very quickly, yes, very quickly. When I talked about failing business continuity about banks in general, I was not mentioning that the staff is not working from home. Those who are working from home obviously are putting the hours, just like the banks are working till 11, we're working till 12 a.m. and 12 a.m. and 1 a.m. But payments, in the example I gave you payments in my specific field, but payments as a general term includes LCs and LGs and even the payments for the loans. So the installment, I understand, is a completely very valid point, but there is a stimulus coming in from the central banks all over the region, specifically targeting the failure of those installment payments. which should alleviate. And I know it puts a burden on your operation in order to help that. But so far, you know, those who are giving grace periods, I know it affects maybe your balance sheet, your bottom line, and all your operations. But payments in the general term that I was talking about, one example was the actual payments in this section. But in general, you know, on the side of the LCs and the LGs, I have not heard so far of a live example of a bank adopting fintech in order to tackle the LG/LC operational side. So that's it, Mirna, back to you.
Thank you, Khalil. Okay, so let me run one poll now. We're back to the fintechs and the role fintechs are playing, which is related to your point, Ahmad, and your point, Khalil. What role will fintechs play during and post COVID-19? Because if you look at the conversation, it's one entity is trying to focus on making sure that whatever debt is out there will be paid, and another entity, which is the fintech, trying to capitalize on the opportunities coming out of COVID-19 and the pandemic, and actually helping the home-based, entrepreneurs or women at home or anyone who wants to set up a business on e-commerce to actually go live. So let me launch this poll. Can you see it? So what role will fintechs play during the post-COVID-19? Is it a huge role, especially payments and customer experience, nothing major, business as usual, or fintechs will fail because of lack of business? Do you see fintechs really, going in through tough times as well? I'm sure, like every other startup.
Is this a question or is this for the poll?
It's a poll. Allah, you will answer that. You will answer that, and later on, I'm going to open the floor for questions. So please, Kaiser, I see you putting a lot of comments on the chat room. So prepare your question, and I'm going to give you the floor in a minute. We have come in a special guest today who wants to talk to Ahmad, somebody who has something to tell you, Ahmad. So I'm going to bring him in a minute, but okay, so I'm ending this poll, and it is true. 72% see that there's a huge role played by fintechs, and especially, what's happening with Egypt and the United States, where they want to give support to the people and all these payments. Banks cannot do that. So it's all the community banks or the fintechs that are doing this. Khalil, do you want to comment on this quickly before I open the floor?
I just wanted to add that, while some fintechs, it's not about failing from a value proposition, but it's about surviving. So there's no doubt in my mind that after this COVID-19 pandemic situation, you will see certain fintechs not survive this crisis. So yes, it's not about failing from a business perspective. Maybe they have a good valid point, but because they're not well funded, not well managed, whatever it is, they might not survive this crisis. If they were on edge, maybe this crisis would put them over. That's all I want to say.
Okay.
So do expect that some fintechs will disappear after this crisis.
Okay, very good. So, so guys, please, for any questions, let me know, raise your hand. And Amir?
Yes, Amir.
Where are you? I can't see you.
Right here. How are you?
Oh, okay, good. Yes, go ahead.
I had a few questions for UAB and just a banks in overall. We're launching a neobank.
Amir, please.
Sure. I previously launched the first social peer-to-peer payment app in Iran, and also we're online gateway. We're providing to a lot of startups there. We're one of the top 5 fintech solutions out there. And now we have, I exited that startup last year. And right now, over the past course of the year, we've been working on a social neobank solution, launching it out of the UAE. I had a few questions to ask you regarding the obstacles we've been facing. I've spoken to a lot of the banks over here, a few of them willing and few of them unwilling, because it actually goes back to the polls Mirna had asked previously. Seems that some of the banks, press is very important for them, some of the tier 1 banks, and they want to work with fintech startups that are coming out of Europe and who have a record, so they can reduce their risk and at the same time increase their press. So in terms of the banks over here, I'm seeing some of the tier 2, tier 3 banks more willing to work with fintech startups in terms of BIN sponsorships, client segregated bank accounts, and other solutions that could be used as rails for fintech startups, to offer to their end users, such as remittance and exchange through your treasury desk and so forth. How willing is UAB in terms of collaborating with fintechs during this COVID crisis and onwards?
Thank you, Amir. So I did mention the priorities of the general banking community, and I'm no different today than actually applying that to the organization I manage. I am, however, very much willing to discuss in detail once we have sight over this crisis in particular. Of course, we will go back to business as usual, and of course, definitely welcome any further discussions. Amir, what you need to understand today is that I do, unfortunately, get a pitch from a fintech at least 5 to 10 times every single day. Every day. And in my opinion, that's a totally wrong approach. There may be some excellent ideas out there, but because this is so repetitive, it's just like getting those 30, 40 CVs a day again. I need to, just for my benefit, I'm not a recruitment agency, one, and I'm not just about fintech. There is so many other things I need to be very careful and worried about in today's world. But yes, after, when things are calmer and I can focus on other things, definitely yes.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Ahmed.
I had a...
sorry, Amir, we have to move to the next, please. Sorry. So, okay, so as I mentioned, we have a special guest now. And I'm gonna, let me just... Melissa. Okay.
Hello, everyone. I would like to thank you for discussing such a great topic, first of all. This topic is at the forefront of all financial institutions, and I would like to thank the speakers, Mr. Omar, Mr. Khalil, and of course, Mr. Ahmed. I think today we were able to view the topic from both perspectives.
Sanad, introduce yourself, Awashi.
Yeah, first of all, I'm the son of Mr. Ahmad Abu Eideh. And I really enjoyed
from Jordan.
From Jordan, of course. We're currently
you're graduating from school and going to university very soon, صح?
Yes.
Okay. And any digital bank, any fintech, any financial services activity has to cater to people like you, right? Your generation. If we're building something for people like us, we're doomed to fail. So go ahead with your question.
Yeah, because of course it's a generation shift where they're moving from one generation to the other, and technology and fintech is really important. But however, my question is like, can traditional banking methods go hand in hand with new fintechs and AI solutions in order to provide services for community or for clients?
You're asking Ahmad, wala?
Any.
Who wants to answer?
I think we'll let this one go for Ahmad. It's easy.
Yeah, okay. ليش مش قاعد بتدرس ولا؟
أنا خلاص.
حبيبي. Of course they can go hand in hand. They have to go hand in hand, Baba. This is the future. And at the beginning, I was mentioning that banks in the future will actually be fintechs. Now, it doesn't mean that the human element will have no role anymore, especially on the credit side. But in my opinion, later on, in the retail banking space altogether, trade can all be at a point in time automated, again, applying the same regulations of today. But yes, of course, they can go hand in hand.
Thank you, Ahmed. Khalil, what's your response to this question? And I'm gonna make it a bit harsher on you, لأنه I know Sanad is trying to be politically right وهيك. Khalil, if a central bank comes and gives you a license to do whatever you need to do without partnering with a bank, would you still partner with a bank?
No. Simple answer is no. We're more agile, we're more technically sound from a perspective of how fast can we develop our service in order to cater for the generation shift like Sanad. With Sanad sitting in his dorm room, becoming 18, legal of age to open a bank account, is he more inclined from a university student such as Sanad, open a bank account using a mobile app or walking into a branch, sitting on some street, signing 3 million pages of agreements and account opening forms? Which would he choose? That's my answer.
When was the last time you visited a bank branch?
Me?
Sanad.
Yeah, I don't really remember.
Maybe never.
Maybe never.
The question
No,
is,
yeah, I did.
The question is, do you have a bank account?
Yes, well, yeah, technically, yes.
Yes.
And yeah, of course, I do prefer using a mobile phone apps and stuff. However, you know, there's priority banking. And for bigger clients, I think traditional methods go better because, you know, there's a direct relationship between the bank and the client. And it's really good for like customer loyalty, for example.
Yeah, but what if I told you that one mobile app, you can access your bank account, your checking account at UAB, your checking account in Riyadh Bank in Riyadh, and your checking account in Barclays in the UK with one mobile app, the same place, at the same time, manage your credit cards and do everything from one app. Would
yeah,
you
of course,
still
that's
go
better.
to the
That's
branch?
more efficient. Yes, of course.
And this is open banking, and this is where fintech is going and being, you know, taken a step back and holding on from the banks and the regulators.
Thank you, Sanad.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. I'm assuming you were attending the whole session.
Yes, I was attending it all.
You've learned a lot. Ahmed, there's Lakshmi wants to ask you a question. Lakshmi, can you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is my voice audible? I'm talking from India.
Okay.
Yeah. Mr. Ahmad, sir, good evening. This is Lakshmi from Tech Mahindra.
Yes,
one
sir.
of the prominent question is what I've been, because I come from a banking, I used to work for a bank and now with a fintech, with a large software company. What I've realized is large bank people, CEO level people like you are taking Amazon and Googles of the world as competitors. They're not considering new age banks as competitors. They are wanting to ant up against what Amazon and Googles are planning to do. For example, they're getting into lending space. They're getting into payment space in a big way kind of a thing. So any perspective from your side on this thing, sir?
I'm sorry, I need is there a specific question, please? Because yes, I agree with you, it's happening. So what where is this leading, please? This question, Yani, I need to understand a bit more, please.
Sure, please. My apologies for that. With this new competition coming from Amazons and Googles with large pockets of money and technological know-how, how is that a bank like you can aim or plan to deter the competition from them? Is my question, sir.
Well, in many cases, as a bank, I am restricted, and you know, there is some serious disagreements between me and Mr. Khalil on the regulation, basically. When we talk about regulation in the UAE on the same app, dealing with a customer in the same app with my bank account in the UK, where there's another 3-4 regulators in the UK, it's not the same. Now, my view on that, and I think we really need to have fintechs and the likes of Amazon, Apple Pay, and what have you, go hand in hand. I don't think there's a competition. These segments deal to a very large extent with unbanked customers. If I look at your own lovely country, India, where less than 20% of the population are banked. The others, the 80% from a financial inclusion perspective, deserve and need to be having the financial services. As banks, very difficult to onboard many of these customers from a KYC aspect. And in my opinion, we complement each other when it comes to that big unbanked portion. Again, if I look at the continent of Africa, you'd still have approximately 65–70% of people are unbanked as well. Now, these payment platforms really facilitate salary payments. They facilitate whatever these people need. So I don't think, sir, there is that sort of competition as of now. Later on, once they start taking the core banking products like guarantees and what have you, because now in the US, for example, you don't need a bank to issue a letter of guarantee. You can go to an insurance company, for example, and get that guarantee done. That becomes much more of a competitive scenario.
Thank you, Ahmad. Omar, it's time to wrap up. We still have only 1 minute left, but we're going to give you the opportunity to say one last thing.
There's someone asking a question. Do you want to answer it? No, I'd rather.
I don't think we have. I don't think we have time. This is Mirhan. Mirhan, you always come late, but yalla, I'm going to give you the floor to ask one last question. Do you want to say it on video, or you want me to say it here? So would banks be willing to consider innovative solutions that can actually help operate more effectively during this time of COVID-19? I think Ahmed has already answered this question, but I'm going to give it to him at the end just to give you an advice on how do you get to win the hearts of bankers. Omar, before we go to Ahmed, what's your advice to all parties?
My last advice is that I encourage banks and fintechs to date and to get to know each other well. Look, I really think it depends on banks championing, putting a champion really atop of there. We've seen banks that have a chief innovation officer. We've seen digital transformation directors, but really more than the title, someone who really understands the pains and points of what the bank needs as well. Because I think everyone agrees that fintechs are important for banks, but if every bank have their own challenges, and there should be someone who is seasoned enough within the bank that understand all the ins and outs in the bank that could advise on what is the immediate need, rather than receiving 5 to 10 pitches every day, and it's not an easy task. So it needs to be someone who has the mindset and the focus to be able to channel those, in my opinion.
Or maybe a marketplace that actually qualifies the fintech.
Maybe I know someone who's doing a marketplace. Yeah.
Okay, Khalil.
Yes, thank you. First of all,
bankers out there.
Yeah, but sure, but you know, just to pick up on Omar's point, I have to say while I might have disagreed a lot with Ahmed on a lot of topics, and this the ongoing you know, struggle between fintechs and banks, yet I must say that Ahmed specifically and UAB specifically have been at the forefront of the most responsive banks in this market. It's, so they might not fit the general stereotype of a rigid bank. So I thank him for that. But again, I think to finalize on my earlier point, where one app can access many banks because of regulatory transportation. So eventually what we should be looking at aspiring as fintechs is we aspire that the regulation can be transported throughout the whole GCC. So one regulator rule, or not one regulator, but multiple regulators, one regulator rules, regulations, in order for us to be, not do one version for UAE, another version for KSA, another version for Kuwait, but have one set of regulations for the region. Maybe it coincides with the US or the Europe, just like Europe did. They have one set of regulation in the PSD and open banking and what have you. And this way we can prosper together as banks. We will always work hand in hand with banks until they buy us out.
Thank you, Khalil.
And thank you, Omar.
This is actually happening already in Bahrain. And open banking allows you to access multiple bank accounts on your mobile phone. And I know Saudi Arabia is considering that, Egypt as well. And once licensed passporting is in place, all this will be possible. Ahmad, I'm going to give you the floor for the wrapping comment. Fintechs and banks have been dating. It's been years now. And we hope that this date results in something fruitful, marriages or babies or whatever, or maybe a failed relationship and divorce, but at least people learn from their mistakes. So Ahmed, I'm gonna give you the floor to give the final tip to fintechs. What's your advice to them to win the hearts of the banks?
Well, thank you. Thank you, Omar, Khalil, Mirna, for allowing me to talk straight to fintechs. And I know there's a lot of startups, and as I said, big passion as far as I'm concerned. Keep at it is what I would advise. You know, Omar's suggestion on banks actually appointing a champion who has the passion and the vision, it's happening a lot, by the way. And stay in touch with these people. Pitch to them. They'll help you a lot. Go to the relevant people within the bank. CEO is usually a dinosaur like me, and I need someone to actually explain to me what the hell this platform is all about. I would not get it. I need the technical guys to guide me. Let's not forget one thing. It's not my job actually to actually understand the technology behind this. I'm a banker. I need to understand balance sheet management. I need to understand fluctuation in interest rate. I need to understand how to structure transactions. That's my core job. My core job is not to understand the back end and the technical side. I will be guided by the relevant people. My advice to you, straight after C19 is over, don't give up. If you're passionate about your idea, keep at it. And an unfortunate reality, Khalil mentioned, and I agree with him for a change. Unfortunately, a lot of startups, including fintechs, will eventually collapse. Please be very focused on today, be very focused on cost. You need to look at your cost base, try to make it as slim as possible. Don't spend that last dollar you have on something that is not essential. Very important, guys. Seek guidance. And many startups actually are set up by people who, that's their first job. I just graduated, I have this lovely idea. I managed to grab hold of $100,000 and have that startup, but with lack of expertise, basically. And one wrong decision can bring you down. Last thing is, stay very focused, don't give up, and use the time wisely straight after this is over, where you have a transformational, not a disruptive, but a transformational idea to the banks. Really pitch very hard and keep at it. And God bless. Thank you.
Thank you, Ahmad Abu Eideh, Khalil, Alami, and Omar Shabaan. Thank you all for attending the session. Unfortunately, I'm receiving a lot of questions and we don't have time, so we'll try to cater for these questions maybe by email or anything else. يعطيكم العافية.
شكرا. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
شكرا.